Welcome to the guide, Exile. In this guide we will discuss how to put together your own build while also building through one together. Building a character in Path of Exile is really like putting together a puzzle, except this puzzle has many pieces and sometimes those pieces can fit into the same spots. Those pieces are also sometimes hiding underneath the couch cushion or in the back of the puzzle box for new players, so to speak. So of course, not only do we have to know how to fit all the pieces together, but also where to find them. To find and place these pieces, we must first figure out what the base of our build is going to be. Do we want to build around a certain unique item? Do we want to build around a certain ascendancy? Or do we want to build around a certain mechanic? There are a million different ways we can approach making a build that seem very daunting to a new player. In this vein, we will keep it very simple in our method for creating a build and build our base around a choice of a main skill gem. In Path of Exile, you generally want to scale a single skill gem for your main damage output that will be used from start to finish on the character, so it makes sense to know what type of skill gem and playstyle you wish to build around first. There are a vast amount of skill gems you can build around, and the whole list can be seen on the Path of Exile wiki active skill gem page. This is linked in the description below. As we know from the Beginners series, there are two main forms of skill gems in Path of Exile: attack and spell gems. These operate much differently from each other and require different investments to make them work. Attack gems perform attack-based damage and scale damage from the innate properties of your weapon. This includes the physical, elemental, critical, and attack speed modifiers on the weapon. Do remember that explicit properties can increase innate properties of a weapon, which is shown by a purple text for that innate property. Global increases to those types of damage or weapon types via modifiers, passive tree, or items will benefit those gems. This means for attack-based gems, you will want to have a good weapon with high innate properties to scale your damage from. Spell gems base damage, base critical strike, and cast speed are determined from the spell skill gem. Only its base damage increases with the levels of the gem. Spell gems do not benefit from weapon innate stats, only from the global modifiers to the spells and the implicit or explicit properties of the weapon. Global increases to the spell's damage types via modifiers, passive tree, or items will benefit those gems. Spells are nice in that they can scale easily with levels and support gems while not needing a very good weapon. So this means we first have to decide, are we going to be an attack or spell-based build? These types of builds are different in their supporting nodes in the tree, their gems, and their gearing, but they follow the same pattern for planning and creating the build. For this guide, I will break down the process of creating a basic new player-friendly two-handed attack-based build, from inception to completion, that is fairly general in nature. It will be able to use any area of effect melee attack skill, and work without any specific uniques. Now of course, you can follow along and apply these same steps to your build regardless of the focus. So now that we have chosen an attack-based skill gem to focus around, we need to consider a few different things. 1. Is the skill gem ranged or melee? 2. What weapon bases can be used with the skill gem? 3. Will the build be crit or non-crit? This will dictate the use of accuracy and critical strike chance. It will also determine whether or not we wish to take the Resolute Technique Keystone, where your hits cannot be evaded, but you can never deal critical strikes. Answering these questions will give us a good idea of where we want to go in the passive tree and what class we wish to make our build with. For our attack-based sample, we are going to look at building around the Earthquake skill gem, or any other area of effect melee gem. For this, we are going to need to answer the previous questions to figure out where in the passive tree would benefit our build best. So is the skill gem ranged or melee? Ours is melee. What weapon bases can be used with the skill gem? Axes, maces, and staves. Will the build be crit or non-crit? Our build will be non-crit. We are not going crit as it is more difficult to get critical scaling from these weapon bases without dedicated investment from the passive tree and gear. With this information, let us take a look at the passive tree and see where we can best start our build. Recalling back to the beginner's guide, we know that the color red is related to the strength attribute. The color of the Earthquake skill gem is also red, indicating that it is a strength-based gem, meaning that it will require the strength attribute to equip, as well as strength-based weapons. Looking at the supported weapon bases, this can be confirmed by their attribute requirements. This means that support for these weapons will exist in the strength-based portions of the passive tree, which is the left and bottom sides of the passive tree. This is an important step in figuring out where the build will start in the tree. Now that we know in the tree where we can get access to supporting nodes for these weapon types, we should pick a class in that general location. The closer we are to these nodes, the less pathing we will have to do through the tree. This will make our tree pathing more efficient to not only get offensive nodes, but defensive ones as well to keep our character alive. Recall that we have the following classes and ascendancies. For our build, we have about 4 choices to go with for starting classes: the Ranger, the Duelist, the Marauder, and the Templar. The Ranger class will require a lot of pathing to reach the left side of the tree, but will still have just enough points to make the build work. This class only offers 2 out of 3 Ascendancies that would benefit this build. Also recall that we only get 8 points to spend in our Ascendancy class, so we cannot get all of the nodes within them. The Pathfinder provides more utility with Flask use, while getting Flask effectiveness, increased attack and movement speed, gained elemental damage, and or poison while using a flask. The Raider provides easy frenzy charge generation with additional perks to frenzy charges, some phasing, small amounts of dodge, increased elemental damage, and or onslaught. The Duelist starts in the general area of the nodes required for this build, requiring little pathing to get through the tree. This class also offers 3 Ascendancies that can benefit this build. The Champion provides permanent Fortify effect, increased Fortify effect, increased damage for you and allies, and or taunt effectiveness. The Gladiator provides block chance for attack and spells, increased damage for each block made, chance to inflict bleeding with the chance to even explode the enemies that were bleeding on death for extra damage, as well as endurance and frenzy charge generation. The Slayer provides stun effectiveness, increased area of effect, some melee splash, onslaught, the ability to instantly kill enemies that are at or below 20% life, reduced physical reflect damage taken, life leech effects will now continue through full life, and or increased leech rate, along with stun and bleed immunity. The Marauder starts in the dead center of the nodes that we need for this build and has minimal or similar pathing to the Duelist. This class offers 2 out of 3 Ascendancies that would best benefit this build. The Berserker grants increased attack speed and movement speed, increased Warcry utility, life and mana leech, and or 40% more damage at the cost of taking 10% increased damage. The Juggernaut provides endurance charge generation, endurance charge perks, increased fortify effects, increased armor and stun immunity, accuracy and attack speed, and or movement speed with nothing being able to slow you below base movement speed. Now the Templar starts in the general area of the nodes required for the build, but does not have any beneficial starting nodes for the build. This class also has no benefiting Ascendancies, as we're not going for support, totems, or critical strikes. After looking at all the classes and Ascendancies, the best options for this build include the Duelist Slayer, the Marauder Berserker, and the Marauder Juggernaut. For our build, we're going to choose the Duelist, as it starts right in the general area of the nodes that we need for the passive tree. From the Duelist, we're going to choose the Slayer Ascendancy, as it provides a good balance of damage, area, and impressive life leech increases for defenses, as well as a free 20% culling strike on enemies. This will provide a balanced offense and defense start to our character. Now that we have chosen a class and Ascendancy, we need to start creating the passive tree, considering our offenses and defenses. The first step in planning a tree is which keystones will be needed. Keystones define the playstyle and mechanics of a character and are an important part of any build. For our Earthquake build, we will want to get the following keystones. Resolute Technique. Our attacks can never be evaded, but we never deal critical strikes. This node is vital in that we are attacking slow and hitting hard, so we never want to miss a hit. Since we are not going for critical strikes either, this keystone fits perfectly. Since we get free stun immunity while leeching from Slayer, we do not have to worry about getting Unwavering Stance for stun immunity. So, this is the only keystone we need for our build, so let's path to it. Step 2. Pathing and getting keystones. In Path of Exile, you get 1 passive point per level, and another 21 to 24 passive points from quests, resulting in a total of 110 to 113 passive points by the soft cap level of 90. It is also important to note that the passive points can only be refunded via refund points gained from quests or Orbs of Regret. Points can only be refunded if they are on the end of a chain of passive points, and you cannot refund a point that would break the connection between your starting point on the tree and the end of chain points. This means that it will be very costly to reset your passive tree completely by the end game. The only time that there are full passive tree resets are on major patches to the game. Now that we know how we receive passive points, how many we receive, and how they work, we want to consider how to path to the keystones in the most efficient manner. In general, pathing in the passive tree is picking up flat plus 10 attribute nodes, or nodes that do not greatly affect the build. To make pathing most efficient, we want to make sure that the pathing takes the least amount of nodes possible, whilst going near offensive and defensive nodes useful to the build. Depending on the build requirements and starting points, some keystones can be pathed to in the shortest number of nodes possible, while others may require a more convoluted route to remain efficient. For our build, we're going to take the following route to our keystone. For Resolute Technique, we'll come down and out of the Duelist starting area, taking the physical damage and life nodes, and head up through the flat attributes into the Marauder start area, grabbing a few good notables. We grab some life, two-handed physical damage, Barbarism for the plus to max to fire resistance, and then finally we arrive at Resolute Technique. As you can see from this pathing, we kept our pathing through flat attributes to a minimum, only spending 8 out of the 28 points pathing through attributes, with the majority of these being strength nodes, which still do benefit our character in small amounts. Step 3. Resource and defense nodes. Planning out resource and defense nodes are very important to any build. This means that you have to consider what resource, life or energy shield or both, that you are using, as well as any specific defense nodes, primary or secondary. For our build, we will want to get life nodes from the tree, as well as some primary armor, and secondary defense nodes, life leech and endurance charges. In general, when building a life-based build, we want to aim at getting around 180 to 200% increased life from the tree. A very good and common location to get life from is the life rectangle next to the Scion starting location. Now, how do we know that this cluster of life nodes is worth pathing to over others? Well, we can do some math to calculate the point efficiency using the following formula. So for our nodes, we would do the following. Figure out the total percent increase the cluster provides. This is 49% for us. The amount of nodes in the cluster, there's 8 nodes in this cluster, and the amount of nodes required to reach the cluster, 3 nodes. So we have a total percent of 49 divided by 11, which results in a point value of 4.45%. This means for every point spent, we are getting roughly 4.45% increased maximum life. Looking around the tree, we can see that 4% is the lowest increased life node that exists. As long as our point value is greater than the lowest value we can get, it is a good investment. Here is what our tree should look like after we've gotten all our resource nodes. Now we have to consider our defense types. As a strength-based character, we will largely be stacking some armor naturally from our gear, but in general, armor is very weak for mitigating anything but medium to small physical hits, so we need more than just that to survive. For my beginner's guide within the defenses section, we can see that there are many options for secondary defense. It is good to incorporate a few of these into any build. Secondary defense types that we can take advantage of from within the passive tree for this build include life leech and endurance charges. These will provide a good base of recovery and mitigation next to our gear implicits. Endurance charges can be gained from the Duelist, Marauder, and Templar areas of the tree. We can gain life leech from our Slayer Ascendancy, but we will also be wanting to grab some extra life and mana leech nodes. This is because we will require this to sustain the mana cost of our attack. Luckily, there is a close-by cluster of attack damage leech underneath the Duelist. We can grab the mana leech and the hybrid life and mana leech node to ensure that we hit our life leech cap with a total of 1.2% life leech, and 0.8% mana leech. We now have all of the resource and defensive nodes selected with a total of 187% increased maximum life in our build. Next, we will look at getting all the offensive nodes and jewels for the build. Step 4. Offense and jewels. A good offense is also a good defense in Path of Exile, as long as you do have some defense already. So now we get to the best part, where we get to dump all the remaining points into damage. For any builds, look for a high point value clusters near your pathing that would benefit your build's weapon choice and or damage type. For our build, we can select between axes, maces, and staves for our main source damage. Since I would like to make it flexible, we will want to get all of the plain percent increased physical damage with two-handed weapons first, before getting specific damage nodes. Beneath the Duelist, there is a good cluster for just this with the notables Executioner and Wrecking Ball. Once we have these, we will have to know what weapon type we'll be using during our playtime. Luckily, all of these weapon wheels are in the same general location in the passive tree right around Resolute Technique. This means we can put these points temporarily into one of these wheels while creating the rest of the tree. For now, I'll be placing these points into the mace damage nodes near our pathing since we can get the Moroi Urki unique at level 57. This is a solid and cheap starter endgame weapon to get for this build and is a mace weapon type. It provides a solid base damage and slow attack speed, which pairs nicely with our Earthquake mechanics. We can also grab the Frenzy Charge node below the Duelist. Frenzy Charges provide 4% more damage per charge, as well as 4% increased attack and cast speed. These are great for giving some extra damage if we can obtain them. By default, every character has a maximum of 3 charges for each charge type. With this node, we will now have a maximum of 4 Frenzy Charges, granting us a total of 16% more damage and 16% increased attack and cast speed at full charges. Here is what our tree should look like after we've gotten all of our offense nodes. Finally, grab any jewel sockets that are close to the build's pathing. Jewel items can be socketed in these. Jewels are items that can be found, crafted, or purchased from other players and socketed into allocated jewel sockets in the tree. Jewels can come with 1 to 4 properties on them, giving them equal or more value than most notables. For our build here, we can grab 3 jewel sockets with our remaining points. Due to the intelligence deficit we have, we may need to socket a brute force unique jewel in the jewel socket near the Marauder starting area. This is just to meet our intelligence requirements for certain gems. This is only required if we don't get the intelligence from our gear. Now finally, our skill tree is complete. Now how do we advance and implement this build? Well, let's take a look at what gems, flasks, and gear we should be incorporating, as well as how we should progress through the passive tree. Most builds will generally have 1, 5, or 6 link setup for the main damage skill gem. Of course, a 5 or 6 link setup is not needed until you finish the story and reach endgame, depending on your weapons and damage potentials. For putting together a support link setup, you will want to take a look at the support gem page on the wiki to see what support gems you can incorporate with your build. This is linked in the description below. I can't speak for every build or the best support gems to use for every build, but I can say that you will want to look out for support gems that provide more damage to your respective skill gem. Recall that more modifiers increase your damage multiplicatively rather than additively as increased modifiers do. Depending on their secondary effects, you will generally want to try and add these into your build. Of course, ensure that the support gem tags match the skill gem tags. For our build, we will be incorporating the following links in order of importance. For our main damage setup, we will be using Earthquake as our main skill. Supporting that, we will have melee physical damage, which provides more melee physical damage. This is a no-brainer here. Less Duration provides more damage, as well as lessening our Aftershock cooldown, meaning that we get more Aftershocks, greatly increasing our output damage. Area of Effect, which provides a larger area of effect, allowing us to strike more monsters at once. Added Fire Damage, which grants a % of our physical damage added as fire damage, which is a good damage increase for generic monsters with low fire resistance. And finally, Weapon Elemental Damage, which provides more elemental damage, also another no-brainer. Now, of course, if you're fighting a single target mob or a boss, we can always swap Area of Effect for Concentrated Effect, which makes your area much smaller, but provides more damage multiplier. If and when you do start using the Moroi Urki, you will want to put your main setup in this weapon, as any gems socketed in this weapon are supported by a level 15 increased Area of Effect. This gives you an effective 6-link if you 5-link it, and an effective 7-link if you 6-link it, meaning that we can drop the Area of Effect gem completely from our links. As a melee attack-based build, we can also take advantage of Ancestral Totems. These totems provide a buff that take a copy of your weapon and attack with it. They can be supported by gems to effectively do the same or more damage than your main setup. For this build, we are going to be using the Ancestral Warchief. Now, this setup is used to support us in single target damage. We will pair Ancestral Warchief with melee physical damage, concentrated effect, faster attacks, added fire damage, and weapon elemental damage. Since we are using a two-hander and a chest piece, we can also have this one in a 5 or 6 link setup. We can place our totem in our second 5 or 6 link gear piece. We use similar gems to our main setup, but instead of less duration, we instead use faster attacks, as we do not have to worry about aftershocks with the totem. This totem is best used on tanky monsters or bosses for that extra damage. We can also incorporate aura gems into our setup for more damage. Here we can pair together some auras and some charge generators. In the same gear piece we can have Hatred, Herald of Ash, Enduring Cry, and Blood Rage. Now these do not need to be linked, but just socketed. Hatred provides a percentage of your physical damage added as cold damage. Herald of Ash provides a percentage of your physical damage as added fire damage, and your overkill damage will ignite enemies in the area for a percentage of that overkill damage, which is very good for cleaning up large AoE packs. Enduring Cry is used for taunting and generating endurance charges based on the number of enemies in the area. This is the main way you will generate endurance charges. Blood Rage provides attack speed, physical damage leech, as well as frenzy charges gained on kill, but comes at the cost of a 4% life degen per second. This is easily overcome with our build, as we have over 5% life regen, as well as a lot of leech. Blood Rage is a very good gem to run on any build if you can sustain the life degen, as frenzy charges provide a lot of extra damage. Here's a good defensive gem setup that can be used in any build, and that we will be taking advantage of in this build. This includes Cast When Damage Taken, Immortal Call, Enfeeble, and Increased Duration. When your character takes too much damage, it will proc the Cast When Damage Taken, and casts any linked gems as long as they are at or below the level listed by the Cast When Damage Taken gem. This setup will cast Immortal Call, which provides a temporary physical immunity, as well as casting Enfeeble on offending mobs, making them weaker and less accurate. It is important to note that you will lose endurance charges when Immortal Call procs, as it consumes them to provide a longer duration. Finally, as all builds should have, a movement skill with an attached Fortify, if it is an attack-based movement skill. We will have Leap Slam, faster attacks, blood magic, and Fortify linked together. Fortify provides a 20% reduction of all incoming damage, a very powerful buff to keep up on any character. It lasts for 5 seconds and can be kept up by leap slamming from pack to pack of monsters. Putting in the faster attacks and blood magic allows us to endlessly spam our leap slam without running out of mana, as we are now using our life for a resource which is always regenning. In summary, it is important to ensure you have the following incorporated to any build: a 5 or 6 link damage setup for your main chosen skill, a defensive setup using a cast when damage taken or possibly a blasphemy curse, a movement skill setup that allows you to evade, escape, and traverse areas, and if possible, always try and incorporate a fortify in this movement setup. The next important part of any build are flasks. This is where hefty offense and defense layers can be added to the build. Always ensure that proper defensive utility flasks are incorporated into the build, as well as proper resource flasks. Also ensure that these flasks are rolled correctly for status dispel. This means that between all of the flasks, the following can be dispelled at any time: of staunching, which removes bleeding, of heat, which removes freeze, and of grounding, which removes shock. These are common ailments that can endanger characters and ultimately end up in their demise. It is generally best to have these on utility flasks, as their buffs will last the full duration of their use, whereas recovery flasks buffs will end once that resource is filled. For our build, we are immune to bleeding while leeching, so we only need to worry about freeze and shock. The following flasks are the basic ones chosen for this build with a budget kept in mind. We will use 2 life flasks, a quicksilver flask, a basalt flask, and a granite flask. These flasks provide good implicit defenses as well as some extra movement speed for evading and navigating the tile sets. If you are feeling more comfortable with your use of life flasks, since we can leech so heavily, we can drop a life flask for an Atziri's Promise. This flask provides extra chaos damage scaling for both our physical and elemental damage, while also giving us more leech from it. It's a win-win in a very affordable flask. This is a great flask to use in almost any build for survivability and damage increases. Some more expensive but good flasks for our build can also include the Lion's Roar Granite Flask and the Taste of Hate Sapphire Flask. For gearing a build, it is important to know what primary defense type you are using: armor, energy shield, evasion, or some hybrid of them. This determines what base items and affixes will be important for the build. Let's go over some general affixes to be looking for on gear. These are some general defensive affixes to be looking for. So for our build, we will be looking at armor implicit types with the following affixes. For offensive affixes, there are a lot of them that can be useful for all builds. You will mainly want to keep your eyes out for damage increases or increases that directly affect your main damage source. For our build, we will be looking at the following affixes. The same goes for jewels, where you will want to look for stats that can directly benefit your build. There are a lot of jewel affixes that can roll, and you can see all of them on the Path of Exile wiki page linked at the description below. For our build, we will want to look out for the following. In general, 3 property jewels with life and more specific damage mods like % increased physical damage with maces will sell for reasonable prices. 4 property jewels will be very expensive. Recall for our build, getting intelligence where you can on your gear and jewels will remove the need to use the brute force jewel. You only need to get it on as many pieces that fulfills the intelligence requirements. Now for just a quick word on leveling this build specifically. I will be discussing leveling characters in another guide, but for completion for this build, I will mention a few topics on leveling. Here are some leveling gems for our build, since we will not be able to get our main skill gem until later in the game. This means we will have to level with some other skill gems until we reach our main skill, Earthquake. Tree progression. For general tree progression in a build, you will want to accomplish most of your pathing and keystone gathering in the early levels, as long as the keystone can be gathered at that level without hindering your gameplay experience. This is because you won't need all of the damage and life nodes right away. After you path to the important build enabling keystones for your build, you will want to trade off speccing into resource nodes and damage nodes, making sure that you gather all your resource nodes before endgame. For example, in our Duelist Slayer build, we will want to follow the following passive trees while leveling. These will be linked in the description below. Now, bandit rewards. I know that these will be changed for 3.0, but for anybody that is viewing this before then, it would be advised to take the following bandit rewards. In normal, we will want to help Oak, as we will want the extra 40 base life. In Cruel, we will want to kill all, as we gain more damage from the tree than the 16% increased physical damage that Oak provides. In Merciless, it is suggested that we help Oak to gain another endurance charge to add to our defensive layer. We can also help Creighton to get another frenzy charge for damage, or kill all of them for a passive point. This is more up to you. So now that we have created a build, how does it function in the endgame? Well, I'd say it works pretty well. We simply enable Blood Rage, hit an Enduring Cry, and leap into a pack of monsters and give them a good old Earthquake. Here are some demos of the build running through tier 11, 12, and 13 maps. So, together we have walked through a build from inception to completion. We picked a skill gem, and from there we got our class and Ascendancy, developed a passive tree, selected some flasks, and looked at how to approach gearing our character. All in all, it was pretty straightforward. I hope this has taken away some of the mystery and confusion from the daunting task that is creating a build, and where to even start. Now get out there and make your own build, Exile. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.